and I would like to thank you everyone for joining this lunchtime conference, this virtual lunchtime conference. My name is Simon Steuer, and I'm from the Publications Office of the European Union. And please mute your microphones throughout the conference. And if you have any questions, put them in the chat box. So why are we here today? This team, Environ.Mate, they participated last year in the EU Datathon. And the EU Datathon is a competition to highlight the reuse of open data. And they participated in a challenge which was called Tackling Climate Change. And we wanted to know how can we use the vast amounts of open data which the EU institutions have to actually tackle climate change. And we think they came up with a very cool solution to communicate a very complex issue like climate change to a completely new audience for us, in this case to kids. And that's why we are very happy to have them here and that they take the time and present their app for you. And with that one, I would like to give the floor to the team.
Thanks. Yeah. Matthias, should I start?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Alex, and together with me there are Matthias and Bernhard. Paul, our fourth team member, could not make it today. Can everybody see the presentation that I'm sharing?
Yes, it's good.
Okay, wonderful. So as Simon already said, last year we participated in the EU Datathon and in the challenge on tackling climate change. And our contribution is a web app called Environ.Mate that is meant to educate predominantly pupils about climate change, its causes and consequences, using scientific data science, and technology. But of course, the web app is open for everybody, and I think there's a lot of interesting content in it that is not only limited to pupils. So let's dive right in. That's the overview for today. We'll start with a in-depth tour of the app. Then Matthias will take over and introduce our team a bit more, talk about our motivation. Then he will talk more about our approach in detail, so how we exactly proceeded and developed the web app. And finally, in the outro, we have the current status, some next steps, and some learnings of the past months. Then, of course, at the end, question and answers. Okay, let's see the app. Okay, can everybody see the app on my screen now?
Yes.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, welcome to Environ.Mate. The first step is, I think somebody is not on mute. I think somebody forgot to mute their microphone.
You can mute them manually if you like to.
Ah, okay. I think it's fine now. Yeah. Thanks. Okay, so welcome to Environ.Mate. The first step is to choose a language. As of now, we offer English and German, but yeah, the long-term goal is to include more languages like Spanish, French, or Polish, for instance. Okay, so let's select English, and then we have this little welcome screen. Elliot is welcoming us to the tour of the app, and he will accompany us throughout the tour and will teach us about climate change. Okay, so the next step then is to select the city you live in. So, for example, we can type in Lux and select Luxembourg, so that you don't get just random information on European countries or some European country, but information that is tailored to your actual to the actual city, to the actual country where you live in. So let's select Luxembourg. Then we have this dynamic map of the world. That is, you can move around. You can zoom in, zoom out, zoom in, zoom back in, and do all kinds of stuff. If you leave one of those information windows, you can just click here, and then you back at where you were. Okay, so the beginning of the tour, we tried to explain in brief what is climate change, and we broke it down to essentially increasing average temperatures. And on this first graph, we show how the annual average temperature in Europe has increased over the past decades in comparison to the pre-industrial average. That means the time before 1900. And we see that the deviations from the average annual average temperature in the past have been positive or negative. But if you look at the recent past, we see that almost all literally all deviations in the past around 50 years have been positive and increasingly positive. So that tells us that the Earth is warming up. Okay, let's dive deeper into what exactly causes the climate change. So what exactly causes the increasing temperature deviations from the average. And here we explain in just fairly simple terms what the greenhouse effect is and how it works. I won't go into detail of what the greenhouse effect is or in detail into what the descriptions say, but I will just keep the big concept in mind. Okay, there's some more information on what the greenhouse effect is and how it works. And greenhouse gases are responsible for the greenhouse effect. And on this slide, we explain that there is not only CO2, there's not only carbon dioxide, but there are many more greenhouse gases. And some are have a much stronger, much bigger impact on the temperature increase. And here we just explain a little bit where those different greenhouse gases, where they occur, in which kind of industries or sectors. Okay, so we learned what climate change is, what the greenhouse effect causes it, and then that greenhouse gases, are the reasons for the greenhouse effect. Just in a nutshell, very brief overview. Okay, so here's the first analysis that actually takes the example of Luxembourg, because we selected Luxembourg as the place we live in, and tells us how greenhouse gas emissions in 2019 are distributed across different sectors in Luxembourg. Okay, so we can hover over this donut chart, and we see that in Luxembourg, apparently, more than half of the greenhouse gas emissions were caused by the transport sector, around a third by the energy sector, and agriculture, industry, and waste are just minor contributors of greenhouse gas emissions in Luxembourg. And here on the left, there are some more descriptions. Okay, let's continue. Now we leave the window view and get back to the map. The cool thing is that you can zoom in, and Luxembourg is a small country, so if you have a very zoomed out view, you don't see Luxembourg very well, so you can zoom in. Here's Luxembourg. And the next analysis we have is the total emissions and the emissions per person in comparison across different countries in Europe. So the interesting thing here is that if you look at total emissions, the darker countries like Germany or Poland, total emissions, Germany is super dark red because Germany has more than 800, had in 2019 more than 850 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions, and much smaller countries like Luxembourg, for example, or Belgium or Austria or Switzerland have much less, of course, because they are much smaller, have a lower population. So to get a different perspective, to get a different view, we can switch to emissions per person, and then the picture changes. So the color distribution is now different. If we look at Germany, for example, 850 million of CO2 greenhouse gas emissions in 2019. This is about 10 tons per person. If you look at Luxembourg, for instance, it's now dark red because, of course, it has absolutely, in absolute terms, not a lot of emissions. But if you consider the population, the number of people who live in Luxembourg, the amount of greenhouse gas emissions per person is very high, apparently. I think we need to fix the tooltip. It's not 17 million tons, but 17 tons per person. We need to get rid of the million. Just a little mistake here. Okay, and this information box here on the right shows us the average in the European Union, which is 8.1 tons per person in 2019. And our country, here in this case Luxembourg, has a per capita emission of 17 tons. So Luxembourg is way above the European average. Interestingly, the global average is 4.9 tons per person, which is far less than most European countries have. Just go here. Most countries have more than the global average. And if we consider the United States is at more than 20 tons per person, and China is at about 9 tons per person. And yeah, there's some more interesting information here. If we go back to the total emissions, we get the rank here. It says that Luxembourg is on rank 28 of the biggest emitters in the EU because it is a very small country and has, in absolute terms, very low emissions, and is only responsible for 0.2% of all emissions in Europe. Globally, the European Union produces around 11% of greenhouse gas emissions, and is on rank 3, on third place after the United States and China. Another pretty cool feature here is that if you click on this little button here, you get the data sources, direct links to the web pages where the data sources are located to generate the insights presented in this overview. So we have greenhouse gas emissions, of course, but we also need population figures to compute the emissions per capita. Okay, let's continue. We zoomed out of the map. We can zoom back in, of course, no problem. This overview presents the greenhouse gas emissions over time in Europe, starting, or the selected year is the current year, or the most recent full year, which is 2019. And we can here select from this little drop down which sector we want to analyze over time. So for now, let's look at the total emissions. And so we can, for instance, go back in time, go to 1900. So 1990, of course. So we see that the tooltips, the information here is different than if you go in the future. So we have different figures here. The colors usually don't change much because the relation among the countries in terms of their emissions is fairly constant. But sometimes you see a change in color. What's also cool is you don't only have 2019 data, but the EU also provides information on projections, on projected, so forecasted greenhouse gas emissions. And we can go, for instance, say 2035 and see how greenhouse gas emissions, is there something happening in the chat? Okay. How greenhouse gas emissions are expected to develop considering the current policies in place. So there are different scenarios, worst case, best case, or what are emissions expected to emissions expected to develop when we don't change our policies but use the policies that we have in place right now. Okay. Good. Something happening in the. How do you change? Okay. Yes, everything is open access. Everything is open source. I don't have a link to the map right now, but we can do that later. Okay, so we can press the H button and we get our window back. Here, there are these two radio buttons where you can change from total emissions to emissions per person. That's how you change the information that is provided on the map and also on the little box in the text here on the right. Okay, so we've seen what climate change is like, and how greenhouse gas emissions are like in the European Union and how they are expected to develop. And let's check out some consequences. So here we listed some common consequences, like rising temperatures, of course, changes in the amount and frequency of rainfall, more frequent droughts and heat waves, and so on and so forth. There are also indirect consequences of climate change, like more extreme weather, mass migration, crop loss, water scarcity, and so on. And so we have analyzed two possible consequences out of this list. The first one is extreme weather. So here, this analysis shows the occurrence of extreme weather events like droughts or heat waves, floods, landslides, storms, and wildfires in Europe in the period from 1990 to 2019. And we see that this graph shows that the frequency of different extreme weather events is increasing. So the thing is that data or these disasters might not be very well documented in the past. So that's one reason why there are less data points in the past. But still, if you look at the recent past, like the last 30 years or so, we see a potential increase in different disasters. Okay, let's go back to the consequences overview. What we also did is we had a look at how rising sea levels from melting polar ice, if polar ice melts, the polar caps melt, the sea level is rising, how this would impact different places in Europe. Okay. So here, for example, this is Foulness Island in the United Kingdom. And this little animation shows how the rising sea level is expected to impact the surrounding area. So here's the ocean. Here's a river and some more rivers. And if the sea level rises, of course, the amount of water in those rivers here will rise as well and will lead to flooding in the surrounding area. So we started with 2010, the actual, more or less current state of things, and looked at projections from scientists for the next 100 years, so to say. And we have a couple of other examples across Europe selected. For instance, this that's in Romania, and you see there's a lot of water around here. And if the sea level rises, the amount of water in that body will rise as well, and will lead to flooding in this. I think it's a protected nature area or something, and will lead to flooding here and potentially destroy the living place for different animals that live here. Okay.
Alex, so it just answered to it, and I think we can go through the questions afterwards.
Okay, thanks, Matthias. Good. Okay. So to sum up, we've been so far we saw what climate change is, what causes climate change, how we experience climate change, that many greenhouse gas emissions are the reason, and we saw potential consequences. I would like to add that especially at the beginning, where we explain what climate change is and what greenhouse gases are, we also thought about including explanation videos. To make things more, to make use of more multimedia objects. We haven't done that so far, but I think there are a lot of great explanation videos out there. So an idea could be to embed one of them in our app. Okay. So we see what the consequences are if we just keep things as they are right now. But of course, we don't want that. We don't want to deal and live with those horrible consequences. What can we do about it? And on this little page here, we have summarized what each single person, each individual can do about all that. And one example is, of course, discuss climate change with your family and friends. Go to Fridays for Future demos to meet like-minded people. Check your ecological footprint and how you can reduce it. Live a more sustainable life. The European Union, of course, has tips on how to counter climate change as well. We have linked that here. Zero waste to live a more sustainable and climate-friendly lifestyle. And last but not least, our web app here is open source, and the source code is available on GitHub, and everybody can work on the app, so to say, and develop own stories, analyze different aspects of climate change. And we have some more practical examples linked here, some zero waste rules here. And of course, further information is available from different official institutions and websites that provide scientifically sound and proved checked data. For example, the European Environmental Agency, or we took a lot of data from the EU Open Data Portal. Okay, so what if we don't change? What if we don't do anything about the current state of affairs? And on this final page, we have included different scenarios in this graph that show over time on the x-axis how the average temperature increase will develop depending on whether we reach, for instance, the agreements from the Paris Agreement, or whether we don't do anything about the current emissions. And things can get even worse. If we continue polluting or emitting greenhouse gas emissions, or maybe even increase the amount we emit, the rise in temperature will be even more drastic. And the higher the greater the rise in temperature, the greater will be the consequences. These different paths with confidence intervals essentially show different scenarios. Okay, and this button brings you back to the start. Just takes a moment. And with that, I conclude the demo of the app, and Matthias will now show you the rest of our presentation.
Okay. Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So to go a little bit back where we started, I want to give you now an overview of how we came to the solution, how we actually worked on it. And first part was the motivation to take part into the competition. And of course, the very obvious and quite simple one is climate is changing and we now feel the consequences. So I think it's at least until a few weeks ago, it was all over the news. And we all had to deal with an overwhelming amount of sources of different information, which you kind of have to have from a more scientific or also more from a some horror scenarios which are demonstrated to you, and it's a little bit complicated to digest all of this. And the pretty good thing is that there seems to be a new generation of politically more active people than before. So more and more people are going to stand for the belief that it's really about time to do something now and not to wait. So all these informations are not something which we haven't been shown like 20 or even 30 years ago, but just humankind decided to ignore it. And now that the consequences come closer and closer, it's time to act. And our idea was to help this younger generation and to go with a format for educating pupils about climate change and to give them means to act, actually. Our team, so Alex said already, but from our background, Alex and me are data scientists, and Bernhard, our software architect, and Paul also supported the data engineering part. And also I have to say thanks to FeldM, because different other colleagues had a look at it from the UX perspective or helped us making this in a mobile version, helped us with the translations and so on. So also a big thank you. And of course, the time we had to work on this, others had to take over other projects. The process we decided to work on was based on design thinking. That's something which we always try to build more customer-centric solutions, and to take usually a step back and not start working in the solution space. So usually it's very easy and you came up with ideas once you're talking about a specific problem, but it's very easy to drift apart and to not have the deep understanding of the actual problem at hand. So that's why we started to focus on this problem space first, and to also talk to our stakeholders. So that means talk to the pupils, also talk to teachers and get their opinion, how they are currently educating or how they are currently learning about climate change. And of course, with regards to pupils, if they are at all interested in it. And this allows us later to fast adjust on changing requirements, and also to, since it was a datathon, to have some shorter development stage until the first minimal viable product. So meaning something which demonstrated to you now, but and works as it is. But of course, there are several other things in the backlog you find along the way and ideas you would add to it. But by focusing on the actual problem of your users, it helps you to prioritize and decides which things can we build in this amount of time, and which of these items should be part of the first prototype and which ones are pushed to a later stage. So as I said, so one source of knowledge was going for the interviews. Second part is the desk research. Always have a look at what other people are doing, what's already there out on the EU portals, for example. But also the NASA has some great websites describing climate change. But what we found, at least last year, I think in the meantime, a lot of things changed, and it got a lot of more people went into this field and spent more time creating really awesome graphics and overviews about the process itself, explanatory videos, and so on. But we didn't find a suitable app or website for pupils to educate them about this topic, and especially offers an easy entry. So not overloaded with scientific facts, but still being scientific, and also explaining the very basic causes and effects. And what we also learned from the pupils was that school and parents are the only source of information. So they are not, even though they use their smartphones all the time, they're not really using any other source of information for this. And what we also learned via our desk research, that, for example, on this Fridays for Futures, these were also misused for deliberate misinformation. So in particular, this was a quiz from a political agency in Germany, and handing out quizzes about climate change, which indicated that the climate change is not actually taking place. And from these insights we got, we drew our vision. So the idea was to explain the cause and effect of climate change to pupils. So in the beginning it was 10 to 14 years, but we moved this a little bit further, since we figured also out that this 10 years might be a little bit too young to work deeper into this topic. And also what we realized while working on it, that the audience is of course much broader. But nevertheless, we wanted to build an interactive and intuitive platform which makes use of scientific data. So it's important that you can have a look at all the data sources which we used. They are directly linked, as Alex showed you, and that we follow and learn and act principle. So one thing is to learn, so understand, see what the causes and the effects are, but also not leave everyone alone with this horrible scenarios, but to also show ways of how everyone can start acting, and to give everyone the means to understand actually why are these things happening, what's my country, which role is my country playing in this, what are all the other countries around me. And this is of particular interest, of course, to the whole of Europe, because there are many countries which are working together on this. And the whole platform is, of course, open source, so you can alter the code, check it out, and also develop your own stories. And so the overall idea was to have one platform to empower pupils with the knowledge about the climate change. So to be sure, if they get into, for example, these climate denial discussions, to be aware where they are standing and to be sure about the things they know. And here is an overview about the different analysis we did. So you saw it also from the demo app already. So we looked at the annual average temperature increase. We looked at the greenhouse gas emissions per country and sector. So for us, it was important to have certain drill downs to look into more granularity and understand better where these emissions come from, to have the comparison between countries. It would have been also, of course, great to have it even in a more detailed level, but that's was just not possible with the data, and also what I've seen before regarding the questions. If we would have or intend to extend it to the whole world, that would have been also great to also see where's Europe standing, where the other countries are, what are the relations, and what's the overall development over time. But of course, it always takes a lot of time to dig into the data, find the right data, analyze this. Is this really the total greenhouse gas emissions, or is this only carbon dioxide? and to make sure that these numbers are actually comparable. And the more sources we add, the more complicated it gets to bring it all into one explainable overview, actually. Also, the sea level rise forecast, where we wanted to see how it actually affects. Luckily for Europe so far, in most regions, it's not the biggest issue, since, for example, the Netherlands have been dealing with it for a lot of time already, and they are planned ahead, and it costs a lot of money already. But I think there are other regions in the world for which it's going to cause much more problems. Still, it's interesting to see how the sea levels rise and what would happen if we wouldn't act to protect us from it. And then we have the extreme weather occurrences and the projections in the final chart on the temperature increase over the next couple of years. Regarding the data, so you can see the data basically originated from Eurostat, from the Open Data Portal, from Copernicus, and from the Environment Agency. And from these, we used also some mixtures of the data to calculate some of the numbers. In our first draft, we also had it on the backlog to look also at the part of biodiversity, but that would have been a completely additional task and tool, probably. Still also very interesting, or it would be an also very interesting data set to work on. And of course, the things which come with the data is the assessment. So see what kind of data do we have, and integrate it into what's already been placed into the analysis. And finally, write some insights and create some content for the app, which was also something which we realized in the process is going to take much more time than we expected, to find the right words or phrases to describe it in a still simple yet accurate manner, and also to make sure that people can take something out of the app for themselves still. And an overview about the time can be seen on the right side. So we had this ideation start phase and the interviews, which still took some time, but more because we had to run around and ask different people. As a company, I also have to say it's not very easy to get in contact with schools, because they assume you to do some marketing, which was not our intention, definitely. So the whole thing is open source. You can hardly see our company on this board, and it was always intended to for people to use it and maybe also to develop it further. But yes, finding the right interview partners and to getting to a certain amount that you can make use of the input was also taking some time. Then, as in every project with data curation took a lot of time. So finding the right granularities, also sometimes dropping the data we already had, because we figured out that, for example, some countries were missing, or some countries had the data not for all industry sectors listed, or that the data was not until a acceptable recent state available. So it was data until 2015, and that's already a few years ago. And we intended to have the most up-to-date data available. And then the part of the analysis and the front end took most of the time, and generating the insights, as I said before. So writing a lot of text along with the visualizations took us also quite some time. The technology itself is client-based, so we don't have a backend. Following GDPR guidelines, there is no tracking at all involved, so that makes it a little bit easier. The technology is, by these principles, scalable also. It's easy translatable in other languages. So currently it's in German and in English available. And yeah, the whole thing is on GitHub. The code is available to everyone to use it. And so we also recently updated the data. So it's sometimes difficult for us to find when the right update turnus occurs. So we have to manually check for the updates and integrate them. And it takes us approximately 2 to 8 hours for each data source. So, and the process below shows, of course, so we have to check the sources in the EU Open Data Portal and the specific EU agencies and other sources, process it. So we used for that mostly R. Also make sure that the data didn't change and that we are still using it in the right manner, and then integrate it in the app. So our roadmap to the future, I kept the things we thought we would do after the EU Datathon last year. So we wanted to go more into the schools, which, as I said before, was complicated already and was also afterwards difficult. So we went to the university and did with them a project for gamification. There, the students decided to have a more game-like interface and approach, but it was nevertheless interesting to see what their thoughts about how one could demonstrate to a younger audience the climate change or how to save greenhouse gas emissions. We also wanted to have some expert audit, optimize the accessibility for people with disabilities, and extend the stories. So as I said before, the biodiversity part would have been interesting, and add further languages. What we did, as said, the university project, updated the data. We pitched for the prototype fund for additional funding, because for us it was also quite complicated to spend a lot of time next to work and family actually on this, to keep it up and running. And we, since that was also one of the bigger feedbacks from the EU Datathon, developed a mobile-friendly version. So our learnings were that education is the first most important step to fight climate change. I think if everybody understands what's really happening, what can be the causes, but also what are my responsibilities, what are the responsibilities around in my country, and to at least get a glimpse of what's happening in this highly complex field still, it could help us a lot to make better decisions and to start acting quicker. And also regarding to the EU Datathon, that great ideas don't also always need a lot of time. So it's just if you have the right team and choose the proper framework suitable for your team and task, that they can be also realized in a short time. But afterwards, I also have to say that it's quite difficult to find the long-term support if you don't have a business case or something which gives you back some money. So funding is an important thing, and also applying for funding is, as I know from the university, some quite time-consuming task. And yes, but we also learned that our concept is not limited to pupils, but we can also apply to a much broader audience to give an easy access to the topic, and that open data is really important and can be a catalyst for new initiatives. But also, this needs continuous collaboration platforms to thrive. So open data, just because it's there, doesn't always help. It always needs some people to continuously have a look at it. Is this the right data? What I'm having also a look out of new data sources which would help or could be of potential interest, and also organizing these things like the hackathon. So it's having some thoughts on the open data part itself. It's really important to have this availability, especially I think it's again be a great place within the EU. So not to leave the field to all the big data collectors. So the big companies can build their AI models on it, and they have the advantage because the single smaller startups don't have the capabilities they have, and also the same accounts to other countries, which already make use a lot of the data, and the data is still not available to the public, and probably some smaller initiatives which could also help a broader audience to benefit from it. There's a lot of valuable data available, but it's difficult since the documentation is kind of different. The granularities are not very clear in the beginning. Also, this part is part of the documentation and the time periods. It's completely necessary, the updates and different data formats. And for us, or for our understanding, it's important to have more open data and to give people the means at hand to develop something new. So what would be some suggestions on the last slide from us would be also to think further in this EU Datathon area. So that was a great possibility for us to develop something. But potentially also think of something like a hackathon weekend. So as was seen last week or the week before with VIR versus Virus hackathon in Germany, where about, I think, 27,000 people actually worked the whole weekend on solutions tackling the coronavirus issues from different fields. The audience was also allowed to hand in different ideas, and this was condensed and into several areas. And in the end, they came up with 1,500 ideas or prototypes. And of course, not all of these are going to be implemented or brought to life and have going to be lived for very long. But I think or at least what I saw, there are some pretty cool ideas which came up and are going to be followed in the future, and also just needed this platform as a kickstart for them, and to give them also an audience and to connect with the other organizations. Another part is this uniform schema, which always helps. So just like the Wikimedia Foundation also has it, which provides easy access to data. And the third part, which would be also some part for a really longer, for example, talk, is differential privacy, which would also help to build AI systems on more, private data without giving away personal identifier information at all. And with that, thanks to you all for listening. And if you have any questions now or afterwards, we would be very happy to answer to them either here, or you can also contact us, for example, on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias. Thank you, Alexander. And as he just proposed to you, please put your questions in the chat box if you have any. I would like to kick it off by asking, you mentioned that people can work on the app on GitHub. How does it work? Can I create my own Environ.Mate application?
Yeah, of course you can. Bernard, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, in general, that's possible. So as the code is available on GitHub, it's called fork, so you can create your own copy of the existing project and modify the existing project to add, for example, a new story, or to remove stories or modify stories, whatever. And the good thing is on GitHub, you could also create a merge request, and your data could be merged back into our existing Environ.Mate application. So it would also allow a collaboration on the existing project.
Great, thank you. Anna is saying the availability of water and sea level would also be interesting. I guess that would not be so difficult for you to edit also, right?
What do you mean exactly by
I guess data sets about water and sea levels.
Okay. Yes, so the original data should be available, and the sea levels were then calculated based on these. Yeah. So about the details of the calculations, I can also check back with Paul.
Okay, thanks. Another question, is there a planned translation to Portuguese?
Actually, we have a Portuguese colleague who also offered to translate it. For us, it's just, at the moment, we're at the point where we have to think about what's going to be next. So we can't work on it full time next to our jobs. So that's where we have to focus, either to find a community who is going to build on it. We have been also in contact with one of Germany's biggest learning platforms to integrate it into their systems. And so we have luckily different colleagues also from Poland and Russia, and also Brazil. So Portuguese would be also on this list to have further translations.
One last question maybe from my side. Did you do a test, or did you get already some feedback from kids who are exactly in this age group? And if you got some feedback, don't be modest.
So we haven't checked it afterwards in details. So just showed it to friends or kids or friends of mine, and so they found it interesting. But I guess to get them more enthusiastic about it, really the part about gamification, working more with videos, to help, or would boost it actually.
Okay, great. So with that, I would like to thank you very much for the presentation, and thank all of you for joining in, and have a great day. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Okay, thanks a lot for the invitation, and thanks everybody for listening and all of your questions already. Thanks.